guys. Um, Welcome to Cybersecurity for Public Sector in the Cloud. My name is Larry Kiger, and I am the America's Regional Leader for Security and Compliance for Education, NPO, and US Fed Civ. And I come from a pretty diverse background in cybersecurity. I've been doing this for about 30 years. I started off in the US military working for the Marine Corps. I worked in several positions with, doing security in terms of terminal area security, or if you go all the way back to the mainframes, kind of giving my age away a little bit, and as well as kind of working within other organizations within U.S. federal government, meaning, I spent some time as an auditor working with healthcare audits, doing HIPAA type audits and going around doing privacy audits, and then I went to work for the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, as well as Department of Interior, where I served as an information system security officer and information assurance manager, and later a deputy CISO. After I left my public sector, I went into some private stuff as well. So I worked as the CISO for Alcon, as well as I worked as a operational security manager or director, senior manager level for a finance and payments company. So I've been kind of around and doing a lot of different things. So I want to address some of these, kind of things that we're going to be talking about. We're going to do a little bit of discussion around what drives people to go to the cloud or the cloud migration type of a strategy and why you do it, why you're even thinking about it. Some of you guys may already be in the cloud, and that's great. I don't want to bore you with a bunch of this stuff, but hey, we do need to talk a little bit about this. So I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about what some of those challenges for the security might be, and any key focus areas for good security posture that I can leave with you, and as well as some shared responsibility in the cloud. We can't really talk about cloud security without talking about what shared responsibility really means. And then implementing shared responsibility, how can you really benefit from that? And then, of course, I want to summarize and bring everything together that we just talked about. So why go to the cloud, I think, is one of the biggest things. That traditional, if you look over there to the left, you see that a lot of the traditional pieces that are sitting out there, like, having to pay for your own equipment and maintain your own equipment, as well as, all the resources and administration that takes. And then any contracts that you have to have for basically bringing in, or standing up your own organization within outside of the cloud, that can get to the final line, which is the cost, right? And usually we go through this whole stage where at the beginning of the year, we're given some money, and then we have to try to not overspend that money. And then what happens is sometimes we overestimate, and then at the end of the year, we're kind of rushing to spend all that money so that we can get the same money back. And that's kind of a rat race that you really don't want to get into. But unfortunately, it's part of what we do in IT. It's part of what we do in public sector. Is we're given what we're given, and we try to spend it as wisely as we can. But let me tell you a little bit about how you can save a little bit more money, because here you're not really paying on the AWS side or in the cloud. You're really not paying for any upfront expenses. You're only paying for what you use. And a good example of that is, like, if I come into a room and I turn on a light switch, that light is going to kind of glow bright. You're going to be drawing power from the electric company. You're paying for what that electric company is giving you. But when you turn that light switch off, you're no longer paying for what that is. And so a lot of what we call these variable expenses, that's how that actually works. You're not really paying up front, you're paying for what you use. So that allows us to kind of be able to do things such as scale up and scale down using elasticity, or sometimes you hear it called elastic load balancing. Is sometimes you've probably heard that on some different messages from AWS, where you can kind of grow your servers or instances, dynamically, horizontally, or vertically when you need it, instead of having to go back and look at what the traditional way of doing it was, which is to add servers or add more, space or more memory each time you have to go in, and you have to, budget for that. But here you don't have to. So that allows you to improve your time and your market agility by being able to really present your information quickly and being able to kind of spin up hundreds, even thousands of servers in 5-6 minutes and really kind of just bring those back down, allowing you to really just kind of focus on how you want to build or how you want to make your message come out from your IT resources. And that's kind of a big, huge benefit from what we get in the cloud. And then of course, there's that whole self-service infrastructure that we serve out as a code, so you can utilize all the API calls you want to be able to do that. So a lot of businesses have a lot of different types of drivers for why we go to the cloud, and I think it's important to really point out just how many public sector people we actually have, and this is growing every year. And this is kind of globally. These numbers are represented globally. You can see that you have millions of customers that come into across 190 different countries, and in the public sector that balances out at about 6,500 plus government agencies and 11,000 educational institutions, as well as about 29,000 nonprofit organizations, and that's quite a bit. So we talked a little bit about those agility drivers and getting that staff productivity by utilizing these different types of functionality, being able to spin up multiple resources and really kind of get out there and do what you want to and experiment wisely, right? Get out there and fail. Because the best learning tool that I've seen in IT is when you fail. You definitely remember every single time you failed. You probably don't remember all the successes that you've had. You can definitely put your finger on the times where you've kind of like, oops. But the ability of being able to kind of roll that back and then just redeploy it to its base form, that's huge, right? Some people come to the cloud because they have end-of-life hardware and software. In the cloud, you don't necessarily have to worry about end-of-life hardware and software because we're managing that hardware and software for you. So the key thing that I really want to focus down on, and I'm not going to go through each one of these guys, we can talk about digital transformation and IoT. That's really exciting right now, and what we're doing with IoT is really cool, as well as any artificial intelligence and machine languages that are going on. And those of you that haven't been on YouTube, go out and watch Murder Cat. It's probably the coolest thing I've ever seen with, utilizing some of our Lens software to kind of Lens services to write a script for, letting a cat in and out of the house, which is kind of cool. So we talked a little bit about cost reduction, but I really want to focus down, seriously, guys, and that's why we're here, is for improved security and operational pieces, right? So I think going through, you can look at a lot of different ways of doing this. You can see how it's easy for you to migrate your critical applications and free up IT resources, by simply being able to experiment and doing that quickly and effectively. Your IT resources aren't focused on trying to manage your applications and actually you're managing your applications, but you're not managing your infrastructure. And I think being able to adopt your modern applications a little bit more effectively, that's kind of been the big seller. And everybody that I ever talked about, because I'm a big application security guy, and I absolutely love application security, and have written a lot of documentation about application security and how to do it right. But I would think that, gaining faster and deeper insights and being able to go out and develop those modern applications that really kind of bring your own individuality into it is super, important. So who are our customers? So many customers here in Canada, and I hope you guys see your name out there. I wanted to bring a little bit out there, so from from a story where a municipal assessment corporation or impact, they kind of run a property valuation application that essentially does like about 5 million properties in Ontario alone. And their business value IT team, they work tremendously faster at about 1/10 of the cost since going over to, running it on AWS IT. And that's just one of the success stories. There are so many others, and I really think you could go out and you could look at any of those stories that you could out on our website as you see it fit to go out there and look around. But No story is ever in the history of IT ever successful without having a few pitfalls, and I really feel like I need to touch on some of these pitfalls. So one is you're not going to be very successful in your cloud migration strategy or your security strategy if you do not have executive sponsorship. So make sure that you have that top-down approach from your executive sponsors, because that's really going to give you the big win from that perspective. You really got to have that. And I say this all the time, anything that you're going to do in IT security or in the cloud, make it top-down. It just makes it a heck of a lot easier. Um, I think all of us in IT have been on projects that have not gone according to to what we thought it was going to happen because somebody forgot to communicate to the stakeholders. And this is why I feel like getting a good stakeholder communication plan is important, and as much as important as having good executives sponsorship from that perspective. Insufficient resource allocation. You can have one and two and not have enough people to do the job. You're not going to be successful. That's just common sense. And then undefined KPIs and outcomes. Those KPIs or key performance indicators. Those are just as important to IT security as they are to your journey to the cloud. And I think that one of the things that you have to understand is that KPIs should be and must be actionable, right? So you have to do something with your KPIs as you're going through and you're developing these KPIs, whether you're doing them through key performance goals and you're trying to meet those goals by showing what you have from your indicators. It doesn't matter if you don't have something that's actionable from that. You will consistently see issues within your IT program or within your actual security program. So make sure that your KPIs have clear defined outcomes and that they are actionable, and some people say SMART, right? The specific, measurable, obtainable, realistic, and time bound, right? So speaking of time bound, you can just pick the bad timing. If you're doing end of year or end of quarter review and you're trying to, balance out your budget, it may not be the time to start your cloud journey or even start your security journey with new security tools and functionality. So make sure you take a step back, make sure that you get that top down perspective, as well as making sure that you get good timing, right? So you want to make sure that everything kind of goes smooth from that perspective. So there are some key challenges that I see every day when I go talk to customers about their security posture, and I think we need to talk about a few of these. I don't want to read off the slide, but I want to focus on really a few things. And I think seeing what we see in terms of large data sets, the databases now as compared to when I first got in IT has completely increased. So the amount of data sets that we're actually processing is now up into petabytes and maybe even bigger than that. And I've seen organizations with petabytes of data, and I was just shocked that when I first said, "Hey, man, you're actually processing petabytes," and he's like, "No, we're bigger than that." So I've seen quite a bit of that. So managing those large data sets are pretty key. I think the other thing that I really wanted to talk to is kind of that signal to noise ratio. As a security person, and everybody in this crowd has probably dealt with signal to noise ratio problems where you've got so many tools that you're trying to manage, it's almost impossible to try to get the data and really have something actionable from it to do some response from it. And I think that's it's death by numbers or death by logs or whatever you want to call it. You get buried pretty quickly. And so you lose your lack of visibility. You end up having a lack of visibility as to what is going on inside of your organization. And I think that's, spells bad news when you stop looking at data that could be potentially dangerous for your organization, because you can't see through the noise and you are not able to really get a good idea of what's running inside of your environment. So all of that in combination with not being able to have good automation in place that at least cost worthy automation is really a demand on what we can do from a security professional. If we're manually having to go through hundreds of thousands of logs, it's there's something that's going to slip through. We're humans, and we often make mistakes. And so I think that that's really key for us to be able to sit there and put our finger on something and say, I knew about this and I acted on this, or maybe I didn't know about this, but I think, because of where it was coming from, or because of what type of an attack it was, maybe it was some sort of a, maybe it was some sort of a DDoS attack from a certain, agency, or maybe it was, or person that was coming in, or maybe it was maybe what you saw was a larger type of an attack that's coming from maybe a third state, or, that's something we need to be able to handle immediately. So I want to have maybe some notification, or maybe some automatic blocking set up, and that's where that low degree of automation would really be helpful. So let's get into what kind of the meat of this presentation really is about. Is basically, how can you improve your security? So I'm going to give you a few things of how you can do this. One is in the cloud, at least in AWS cloud, you're going to inherit global security and compliance controls automatically right out the gate. And because security is our top priority, we listen closely to what our customers have to offer, and we give good, secure information at the get-go. So basically, you're building on secure data, and you're building on some of the, best practices that we can put forward for you that are, by the way, certified every year, and sometimes every 3 years, depending on what you're, depending on what, you're running off of PCI, or whatever your compliance regimen belongs to, right? So that kind of goes with kind of being able to scale with your superior visibility and control, and being able to really kind of get a good eye on what you have internally, because you're building it out, and because it's as a code, infrastructure as a code, you're being able to actually get and run your own API codes, or run your own API calls to see what your infrastructure is actually doing. And this can be translated into maybe a SIEM that you have in place already, or you're utilizing some of the SIEM tools that we have in the organization. We talked a little bit about highest standards for privacy and data security, but I want to drill down a little bit more. Not only can you do that, but we're going to ensure that you have encryption in transit, and we'll give you the tools to run encryption at data at rest. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that as we go on with the next slides. Automation is another big piece that we can bring in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll even show you, I promise I'll show you an architecture with that actually built in. So we'll also talk a little bit about our partners and our solutions, and you'll get a chance to see all of that. All right, so let's jump into kind of what our shared responsibility really means. And so in here, we talk about security of the cloud, and AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of these services that are offered in the cloud. And then you as the customer are responsible for the data that you put into the cloud. And that's really what the big pieces are coming through, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this, but it's things like, we're going to give you a secured EC2 instance, or Elastic Cloud Compute instance, right? Elastic Compute Cloud, sorry, instance, and we'll do some like a VPC, so what we call VPC. These are virtual private clouds, which help separate your data from the rest of the people, right? So if you look at what shared responsibility model in practice kind of looks like, you can see pretty much what we're doing here. So if you see on that foundational services that you see up there, basically compute, storage, databases, and networking are things that we are going to be helping you to secure. These are the actual infrastructure, or the actual hardware that's sitting back in our data center. And that brings me into kind of like really how this is all built out. So we have these things called regions. These are geographical locations within an area, or a geographical area that is that has these essentially logical data centers that are inside of there, and we call those availability zones. So these availability zones can be several availability zones, can be actually in one region. So you are typically seeing about 3 availability zones. That doesn't mean that it's consisting of 3 data centers. These are actually a group of data centers that are inside of those availability zones. So you could probably see maybe 10, 15 data centers and maybe in one region, spread out through those availability zones. And then we have these things called edge locations, and these are essentially how we do our CDN environment. For those of you that don't know what CDN, that's Content Delivery Network, and that kind of goes across about 200 plus different, edge locations, and allows us to actually transmit and push information logically out. And a good thing to note on this is these edge locations from and to the availability zones, these are encrypted, so you have data, encryption in motion. So what does that leave for you as the customer? This is stuff that you're putting in. So this is your opaque zeros and ones that are going in there. So we talk about maybe your operating systems and whatever firewalls you're actually going to be putting into in place for that. Any of your network configurations and your platform or application management, customer data that you're bringing in, right? So that's the stuff that you have to be really responsible for. And of course, we have a lot of tools for that. So I do need to point out that, as we go through, we all have different reasons for why we chose to go to the cloud. And I think that I can point out to you a couple of things that I did when I was choosing to go to the cloud back in, a few years ago when I was looking at, kind of going into the cloud. I was like any other CISO during that time, and I was very, very, I really didn't trust the cloud, and I didn't think that any data could be safe outside of my data center, right? If I wasn't the one that was putting my hands on it and I had the physical control of that, I didn't think that the cloud was going to be, really good for me. But we had so many different compliance needs that I had to do something. And I needed to find something that was going to be able to drive the fact that I had to get all of these compliance pieces in there, and I needed to be able to logically separate them. And so that's what brought me into the cloud. So if I'm pointing here, if you can see this, I think that the piece that I'm talking about is this different compliance and security needs, and I had for each one of my applications a different security requirement or a different compliance requirement. So if I was working in accepting payments from parks, I needed to be able to provide something, separate, that was separate from everything else. And this becomes very expensive. Or if I'm trying to store classified material, I don't want to store it on a network that is going to be, kind of in the same as my non-classified information from that perspective. And so that really drove my decision to go to the cloud. And then of course we all have different legacies because, some of us have really big servers that we're running and functioning on. So how can you do this? How can you really get good at it? We recommend taking a look at our our AWS Cloud Adoption Framework. We call it CAF. It's basically aligning to business and IT strategy. So this really plays well with a lot of different organizations. And guess what? It really does line up with our NIST cyber framework, and I'm going to walk you through how that actually works. So for those of you that are using CSF, you may be familiar with it. So let's talk a little bit about how these work. So people is often our biggest piece where we're actually looking at in terms of IT security, because we have compliance pieces that are in place there, and we are also needing to train these folks. We're often driving organizational readiness by doing things like practicing any of the incident response drills that we can possibly do. And also they need to be able to respond to the governance, right? So if we look at just these first 3, getting aligned to business, getting aligned to people to prioritize competencies and prioritize and drive organizational readiness, and then governance, that's the big 3 that we work with every time. But going from platform to security to operations, I really want to talk a little bit about the security and the operations pieces. So I'm going to kind of move through this a little bit. So from a security perspective, when you look at security, we look at directives. Those are basically our established compliance models and environments that we operate within. So if I'm writing governance documentation, that's a directive control. And then I like to move to preventative, next, and that's a way for us to protect our workloads and migrate threats and vulnerabilities. And these are really key areas to focus on. And I'm going to actually dive in a little bit deeper on some of these. But you can, but without having to kind of go through and read all of this stuff, for those of you that are interested, we do have this sitting out at the AWS booth, and I've downloaded these for you to be able to grab and take with you. But this link right here will take you in there as well. It's a pretty interesting white paper. So what we ask for a lot of people to do is to look at their inspect and detect possibilities. These are your vulnerability management and things of that nature. These are where you're going to your IDSs and IDPs. These are going to be a lot of your detect and response type things. So, so when you're looking at this, we want you to, be able to look at this and be able to put some good documentation in place and be able to document exactly what you're doing and how you're going to be taking your detective controls and doing something with it. And that creates a need for a playbook for security responses. And playbook is often what we look at from an automation perspective. So if you look at what, the controls show up again, I hit boom. And so next thing you know, so what are we actually talking about in terms of being able to do something with, what we have? So, when we talk about our recovery, which also lines into, kind of this preventative and responsiveness piece, how do you recover from, from a compromise, or how do you recover from some disaster? And, typically what we look at is, we have tools that are actually going to help you out with that. And I'm going to show you in the next slide how we do that, so you can respond and being able to respond to security incidents and do something with that. And I promised you that I would show you kind of that architecture and give you kind of a summary of how that actually works. Identifying all the assets and then controlling, as part of that identify piece, right? So getting an idea of what you have actually in your network. That's kind of big. You'd be surprised how many organizations I've gotten into and they said, what do you mean we don't have a list of all of our servers? Control access to servers and data. That is your protect perspective. So let's take a look about, super busy guys, and I apologize for this, but I'm gonna quickly go through this, right? So these are some of the tools that we have in place for that. So when we talk about identity, using things like your AWS service catalog or AWS config to look at the configurations of your servers, to be able to take a look at your instances and say that I have a gold standard and here's how it's actually running. AWS config, that's the way you do it inside of AWS. Plus you have things like well-architected tools to be able to kind of take a look at your existing infrastructure and see, do I have any big things called out for security, or do I have something that, is not architected, as it should be? Well, this well-architected tool allows you to kind of go through and run for yourself and see exactly what architectural standouts you have. We have professional services as well that will come in and help you out with that if needed. So on your protect side, remember we talked a little bit about the Amazon VPC, the virtual private cloud. This is helping to separate or segment your data logically to allow some of your data to be separate from the rest of your information. And a lot of times what we see with these VPCs is that, there are some architectures that have multiple VPCs set up, where they're actually logically separating out their data. And that's one way of doing it. And then of course, your AWS WAF, which is our wireless, our web application firewall, and our AWS Firewall Manager, allowing you to manage multiple firewalls from one single screen, right? And then IAM. Obviously, IAM is a protection control because that's where you're writing the policies to give your people the best practice in terms of being able to, like I have administrators that do administrative stuff, but I don't have users or somebody that's going in to manage databases going into my instances and managing those. That's called role-based access. Setting up good role-based access is one of the key areas, right? And then I talked a little bit about encryption. So KMS is your encryption piece. Where you can actually store keys and you can actually go through, and these are FIPS 140-2 compliant, and you can store your keys or you can create keys in here and use Amazon's keys. And keep in mind that these keys are public-private. So you hold on to the private and give out the public, and Amazon doesn't have access to that. So on your detect side of the house, obviously Amazon Macy's set up there. So for those of us that are worried about privacy, Amazon Macy can go through and look at your data sets and see where your data sets fall out and recommend some privacy protection around that. You can go in and use it to do identification of different information that you have out there, as well as getting deep into like Amazon Guard Duty, which is going to help you out with some of your vulnerability management pieces and things of that nature, right? So we can use this information to do an automation for response. And how is that working? We're using something like AWS Lambda, which is our serverless type of infrastructure that's going to allow you to do right automation to kind of be able to take something from guard duty or from some of the logs and be able to do, like CloudWatch or CloudTrail and do something with it, right? Maybe block or maybe do something else. So how is it that we, as an organization, do our recovery, and how does it work so fast? Well, we have this thing called CloudFormation. AWS CloudFormation basically allows you to create a cloud formation or a set of scripts that's going to run that you can actually build your environment up and spin it up just like that. No time whatsoever. You have something go down, or you just want to build it back up, or you're trying to replicate it across production, or to bring it up to dev, bring it down to dev, or stand it up in your test environment. You can use CloudFormation to build the exact environment that you have elsewhere. So one of the ways that you can do that is using a service like Amazon Glacier, which is our simple storage. And essentially you can take that and you can add snapshots and archives into it from each one of your instances, or you can utilize it for storing some of your log files to call back later. So if you're interested in doing that type of forensic work, this is a good way to do it. So just quickly going through this, I talked about some of the capabilities that you have in the cloud. Obviously, having good visibility, GRC tools, and things of that nature, like Guard Duty that are built in. There's others, obviously. Threat intelligence is built in there. You have IT operations management, identity and access management. All of these are built in, and all of them have tools. But should you need it, we have a good AWS Partner Ecosystem that includes not just tools from the marketplace, but also companies like Deloitte, who are partners up with us to help you provide service with your security engineering, and in Booz Allen Hamilton, who is also another organization that we're partnered up with to really kind of drive down governance and risk and compliance, right? So they can help you set up information and systems and processes that that you can just simply call them and they'll work with them and be able to do this, right? So setting up the proper commitments and contacts, right? So here it is. I promised you that I would do it. So I know that Control Tower, please don't hate me. I know Control Tower is not yet here in Canada, right? But I know it's coming. So I wanted to make sure that this is just a multi-account strategy, essentially. So you could use anything that you want there, but this is your multi-account strategy. And what this is giving you is your dev, your test, and prod. And then what you're doing is you're going in and you're utilizing the tools that you have, right? So you have load balancing, that's the elastic piece that I talked about. And notice it has its own security group. And we'll talk to you a little bit. I'm going to give you kind of a heads up on that. But instances, and then your RDS, for relational databases, right? So, so if you're doing that, these security groups, think about them as like dynamic firewalls. Essentially, they're really a way of controlling what ports and what IP addresses can get in and out to those instances or those RDSs, right? So I can take all of this information from the VPC, remember that virtual private cloud, and I can put it in, I can get all of the ins and outs going into the VPC flow log, plus the DNS logs, and any CloudTrail, things that I get from the instances or from RDS, as well as the CloudWatch logs. I can drop them into an Amazon S3, and I can do something with them. And so here you see it's going into Guard Duty and processing those events that go into the security hub. And then you can see Amazon Macy is also kind of out there looking and pushing that to Security Hub, which is kind of your heads up, one all-in-one database or a dashboard that allows you to see all the security events. And then you have Amazon Inspector that is running some inspection of the data that's coming through. All of this can go directly to a security analyst, or I can build up some automation, and that's what I've done. So here I've got some of these CloudWatch events going into a Lambda, which is going to generate, in this particular case, which is going to generate an SNS. That's a simple notification service. That's basically, I've got to set up to run an email that sends it to the security analyst and says, hey, this is what's doing, do you want to act on it? And so depending on how you do your playbooks and set that up, that's exactly how you're going to be able to set that up. So you could actually have your playbook say, once I'm notified, the security analyst can then launch a playbook to do something with that data, block an IP address or allow certain things to go through. So this is the piece that this is really summarizing kind of what I said using all of those services. So I wanted to go away with just a couple of call to actions, and I think one of the things that I want you guys to look at. So everything that I've covered for you: cloud adoption framework, well-architected framework on the security pillar side, best practices, incident response, and so on and so forth. Right? They're all sitting right here, and they're back at our booth, and so you can be able to get those booths and hit those booths up. Okay. So I appreciate it. I know we went about 6 minutes over. I really appreciate you guys attending. And what I'd like to do is invite you to come by the booth if you have any questions, and just throw those questions out at me. I know that the moderator was taking taking note of any questions that you guys had, and I realized that it was a compressed security talk, and I really want you guys to be able to get what you want out of there. So, definitely stop by the booth. I'm going to be sitting there waiting on you if you have any questions. And thank you very much.